was one of those nights where nothing important had happened, and I was just winding down before going to sleep. I'd been sitting around watching random late-night TV, the kind of shows you don't even pay attention to, just letting the noise fill the room. By the time I finally got up, it was around midnight, maybe a little later. The house was quiet, and everything had that still, heavy feeling that comes late at night when most people are already asleep. Before going to bed, I called my dog so I could let him out into the backyard. It was part of the routine. He would wander out, do his thing, and then come back in so we could both crash for the night. Nothing unusual about it. That night, though, the moment I stepped outside, something felt off. There was no moon out, and I didn't have any yard lights on. So the entire backyard was swallowed in darkness. Not the kind where you can still make out shapes or outlines, but the kind where everything blends together into one solid black space. I couldn't see the fence clearly, couldn't see the far end of the yard, couldn't even really see where the ground stopped and the garden began. It was just darkness. At first, I stood there like I always did, waiting for my dog to come out. But within a few seconds, I felt it. That feeling that you're not alone. It wasn't the usual kind of nervousness you get when you're standing in the dark. It wasn't imagination running wild or shadows playing tricks on your eyes. It was something stronger, something sharper. It felt like my body was reacting before my brain had time to understand why. Like some kind of instinct had been triggered. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. My arms prickled. Like static was running across my skin. Everything around me felt too quiet. Not just normal quiet, but unnaturally still. Like the entire space was holding its breath. I didn't move. I just stood there, completely alert, trying to listen. That's when my dog came out. He trotted into the yard like he always did, relaxed and completely unaware of anything unusual. He stretched, let out a lazy yawn, and for a brief moment I almost convinced myself that I was overreacting, that whatever I was feeling was just my imagination. Then everything changed. His ears shot up instantly. If you've ever seen a bull terrier lock onto something, you know exactly what that looks like. Their whole body shifts. They go from relaxed to focused in a split second, like a switch has been flipped. Mine was a big white bull terrier, around 90 pounds, strong but usually calm. He was the friendliest dog you could imagine, the kind that would rather lick someone to death than hurt them. But in that moment, he wasn't calm. His entire posture changed. His muscles tightened, his stance lowered slightly, ready to move. The fur along his back stood up, and his attention locked onto something out there in the darkness, something I couldn't see. Then he started growling. It wasn't a normal growl either. It was deep, aggressive, and full of warning. It didn't sound like curiosity or confusion. It sounded like pure anger. Whatever he was sensing out there had flipped something inside him that I had never seen before. Before I could even react, he took off. He launched himself into the darkness, barking and growling, charging straight toward whatever had caught his attention. It all happened so fast that my brain barely had time to catch up. 1 second, he was standing beside me, and the next he was gone, swallowed by the blackness. I panicked. Without thinking, I yelled out his name and started running after him. My heart was racing, and I couldn't see where I was going, but I didn't care. All I knew was that something was out there, and my dog had just gone straight at it. I remember shouting into the darkness, threatening whoever might be in my yard, trying to sound more confident than I actually felt. At the same time, there was this part of me hoping I wouldn't actually run into anything. It was a strange mix of fear and adrenaline, like my body didn't know whether to fight or run. Then I heard it. A loud, sickening impact. I heard a sharp thwack that echoed through the yard. Immediately after, my dog yelped. The sound hit me hard. It wasn't just a bark or a growl, it was pain. Real, sudden pain. And then I saw him. He came sprinting back toward the house, moving faster than I had ever seen him run. His tail was tucked between his legs and his head was low. Even in the darkness, I could see something was wrong. As he got closer, I saw the blood. It was all over his head, from his nose up to his ears, dark and wet, catching what little light there was. For a second, everything inside me just froze. Then the fear turned into anger. Something had hurt my dog. I stopped where I was, still standing in the darkness, barefoot and completely exposed. My heart was pounding, but now it wasn't just fear driving me. I shouted into the yard again, louder this time, threatening whoever or whatever was out there. I don't even remember exactly what I said, just that I meant it in that moment. For a few seconds, there was nothing. Then I heard movement near the wooden gate at the edge of the yard. Loud scraping sounds, like someone was climbing over it in a hurry. There were a couple of heavy thuds, like feet hitting the ground on the other side, and then silence. Complete silence. Whatever had been in my yard was gone. I didn't wait around to confirm anything. The moment the noise stopped, I turned and ran back into the house. I slammed the door behind me and locked it, my hands shaking as I did. My dog was already inside, hiding under the couch. Seeing him like that hit me harder than anything else. This was a dog that was always confident, always playful, never scared of anything. And now he was cowering, trying to make himself as small as possible. I knelt down and called him softly, trying to calm him down. It took a moment, but eventually he came out, still shaking slightly. I pulled him into a hug, checking him over as best as I could. There was blood everywhere on his head. For a few seconds, I was convinced he had been seriously injured. My mind was racing through all the possibilities, trying to figure out what to do next. But as I started cleaning him up, wiping away the blood, something strange became clear. There were no wounds, no cuts, no bites, nothing that explained the amount of blood I was seeing. I checked him over again, more carefully this time, parting his fur, feeling along his head and neck. Still nothing. That's when it hit me. The blood wasn't his. Whatever had been in the yard, my dog had gotten to it. He had done some damage before getting hit himself. Enough damage to come back covered in blood that didn't belong to him. The thought sent a chill through me. I didn't know who had been out there or why they were in my yard in the first place. I didn't know what they had used to hit my dog or how bad they had been hurt in return. All I knew was that something had been close enough to attack and that it had just barely gotten away. That night, I didn't take any chances. I brought my dog into my room and let him sleep on the bed with me. I grabbed a baseball bat and kept it within reach, just in case. Every little sound in the house made me tense up. Every creak or shift of the building felt louder than usual. I kept expecting to hear something outside. Footsteps, movement, anything that would suggest whoever it was had come back. But nothing happened. The night passed slowly, and eventually, morning came. In the days that followed, I kept a closer eye on things. I checked the yard during daylight, looked near the gate where I had heard the noise, but I never found anything definite. No clear signs of who it had been or what they had been doing there. My dog, on the other hand, bounced back almost immediately. Within a day or two, he was back to his usual self. Playful, relaxed, completely unfazed on the surface. But there was something different about him after that night. A kind of confidence, like he knew what he had done. When we went out to the park, he carried himself differently. There was a swagger in the way he walked, like he had proven something, even if no one else knew the full story. And maybe he had. Because whatever had been in that yard that night, it had come in quietly, hidden in the dark, thinking it had the advantage, and it left bleeding. For a long time, I had been living in the basement of my family's house. It wasn't exactly by choice at first, but over time it became my space. It was quiet, separate from everything else, and after a while I got used to being down there on my own. The basement had this constant low hum of silence, broken only by the occasional creak from the house above or the faint sound of pipes in the walls. It felt removed from the rest of the world, which, at the time, was exactly what I needed. Things in my life had been falling apart recently. There had been some serious family issues. the kind that shake everything you thought was stable. It forced me to see things more clearly, including my relationship. I had been with someone who, looking back, wasn't good for me at all. But when you're in it, it's hard to see things the way they really are. Eventually, everything came to a head. One night, after everything that had been building finally spilled over, I ended things with my ex. It wasn't calm or clean. It turned into a full argument, messy and emotional, and it escalated to the point where the police had to get involved. That alone should have been enough to make me feel some kind of relief once it was over, but instead, I just felt drained, completely exhausted, mentally and emotionally. That same night, my brother wasn't home. Normally, that wouldn't have mattered much, but after everything that had just happened, I didn't feel comfortable being alone in the basement. It suddenly felt too isolated, too cut off. So instead of going downstairs like I usually did, I decided to stay upstairs and sleep on the couch. I told myself it was just in case my brother came home. But really it was because I didn't want to be alone down there. The house felt different that night. Quiet in a way that wasn't relaxing, more like tense. Every small sound seemed louder than it should have been. I remember lying there on the couch, staring at the ceiling, trying to calm my mind enough to fall asleep. Eventually, I must have drifted off because the next thing I remember is waking up in the morning. It was around 8 when I got up. The light coming through the windows made everything feel normal again, like the events of the night before had already started to fade. For a moment, I even convinced myself that things were going to be okay. Then I went downstairs. The moment I stepped into the basement, something felt wrong. It wasn't obvious at first. Nothing was dramatically out of place, nothing broken or overturned. But there was this subtle shift, like the space wasn't exactly how I had left it. My brain picked up on it before I could fully understand why. I looked around more carefully. Some of my things had been moved. Not in a chaotic way, but just enough to notice. Small items that I knew I had left in certain spots were slightly off. And then I saw my laptop. It was open. I was sure I had closed it before going upstairs the night before. I always did. It was a habit. Seeing it sitting there, open and powered on, sent a wave of unease through me. I felt my chest tighten, and my thoughts started racing. At first, I tried to explain it away. Maybe I had forgotten. Maybe in the stress of everything that had happened, I just hadn't noticed leaving it like that. But deep down, I knew that wasn't right. I walked over slowly and looked at the screen. It was still on, not asleep, not locked. That alone made my stomach drop. I moved the mouse slightly, and the browser window came into focus. Without really thinking about it, I clicked on the history. The most recent page visited was still there at the top. It was a bus schedule. Specifically, it was a route from my house to my ex's place. And the time listed for the bus was only a few minutes away from when I had woken up. For a second, everything around me seemed to go quiet. My heart started pounding, and I could feel that familiar rush of panic building in my chest. I hadn't searched for that. There was no reason for me to look up a bus route to my ex's house. Not after what had happened. Not after the police had been involved. The thought of going back there hadn't even crossed my mind, which meant someone else had done it. The realization hit hard. Someone had been in the basement. Not just briefly, not just passing through. They had used my laptop. They had been there long enough to look up travel plans, and they had done it while I was upstairs, asleep, completely unaware. I felt like I couldn't breathe properly. My hands started to shake as I looked around the room again, this time with a completely different perspective. This wasn't my space anymore. Someone else had been here. I forced myself to move, to check the rest of the basement. Part of me didn't want to, but I knew I had to. I needed to know if they were still there. The basement had a back room, a smaller area that I didn't use very often. It was mostly for storage, and I rarely went in there unless I needed something specific. As I approached it, I felt my heart beating harder with every step. I pushed the door open slowly. At first, I didn't see anything unusual, but then I noticed it. There was a makeshift bed set up in the corner. It wasn't anything elaborate, just a pile of blankets and some clothing arranged in a way that made it clear someone had been sleeping there. It looked recently used, not something that had been left behind for a long time. I froze. My mind tried to process what I was seeing, but it didn't feel real. It felt like something out of a bad dream, something that didn't belong in my life. Then I noticed the window. It was open. That window was usually kept shut. I knew that. It wasn't something I would have opened, especially not at night. The basement window led directly outside, low enough that someone could climb in if they wanted to. Everything clicked into place at once. My ex? It had to be. After everything that had happened the night before, after the argument, after the police, they had come back. Not to the front door, not in any obvious way, but quietly. Through the basement window. They had been in my space, moving my things, using my laptop, sleeping just a few rooms away from where I would normally have been. If I had gone downstairs that night, like I usually did, I would have been there with them. The thought made my stomach twist. I stood there in that doorway for what felt like a long time, just staring at that makeshift bed, trying to wrap my head around it. The idea that someone had been that close to me without me knowing was overwhelming. It wasn't just fear. It was a deep, unsettling feeling of violation. My space, the one place I thought I had control over, had been entered and used without my knowledge, and not by a stranger, but by someone who knew me, who knew where I lived, who knew my routines. I quickly backed out of the room and made my way upstairs. Every instinct in my body was telling me to get out of that basement, to put distance between me and whatever had happened there. Once I was back upstairs, I locked the doors and checked the windows, making sure everything was secure. My mind kept replaying the same thought over and over again. I had just barely missed them. They had been there while I was in the house, while I was asleep, close enough to hear me, maybe even see me if they had come upstairs. And I had no idea. That realization stayed with me long after that day. Even after everything was handled, even after I knew they weren't coming back, the feeling didn't go away completely. Because once something like that happens, you don't just forget it. You start to question every small sound, every out-of-place detail. You become more aware of your surroundings in a way that never fully turns off. And sometimes, late at night, when everything is quiet again, you can't help but think about how close you came to walking into something you would never have been prepared for. Back in the 90s, I worked for a production company in Hollywood. It wasn't a typical office building. The company operated out of a large house that had been converted into a workspace. From the outside, it still looked like a normal, expensive home, but inside it had been redesigned with offices, editing rooms, and work areas. It had this strange mix of comfort and professionalism, like you were working in someone's house, but still expected to treat it like a corporate environment. The people who owned the company were extremely wealthy, the kind of wealthy where everything ran smoothly, because there were always people behind the scenes making sure it did. They had full-time security staff, people who lived on the property, and others who handled different aspects of the house and business. Now, it was the kind of place where nothing felt neglected. And there was always someone around, even late at night. I got into the habit of staying late after work. Sometimes I had projects to finish, but other times I stayed just because I didn't feel like going home yet. One of the perks of the place was a huge television in an upstairs den. It was easily the biggest TV I had access to at the time, and watching movies there late at night became something I looked forward to. The house would quiet down after hours, and it almost felt like I had the entire place to myself. Even though it felt empty, it never truly was. The security team would patrol the property throughout the night. Every night, like clockwork, one of the guards would come down into the office area to check that everything was okay. I got used to hearing them. Their footsteps, the soft sounds of doors opening and closing, the general movement of someone doing their rounds. Whenever I heard them, I would usually step out and let them know I was still there, just so they wouldn't think something was wrong. At first, everything about it felt normal. But after a while, I started noticing something strange. There were times when I would hear movement, just like I did when the guards came through. Footsteps, faint shifts, the subtle sounds of someone walking around. But when I stepped out to check, there would be no one there. No guard, no staff, nothing. The first few times it happened, I brushed it off immediately. It was easy to explain away. Maybe I had just missed them. Maybe they had already moved on to another part of the house, or maybe the sound had come from the TV upstairs, and echoing in a way that made it seem closer than it was. That's the thing about places like that. When you're alone late at night, your mind fills in the gaps. You hear something, and your brain tries to make sense of it as quickly as possible. I didn't think much of it. I had no reason to. This went on for months. Every now and then, I would hear something that didn't quite line up, but I always found a way to rationalize it. I had been working there for almost a year by the time something happened that I couldn't explain so easily. One night, I was actually working late instead of watching movies. I was sitting at my desk, focused on whatever project I had in front of me. My desk was positioned just behind the reception area, separated from the main floor by a half wall. From where I sat, I couldn't see everything, but I could see enough of the open space beyond that wall. The house was quiet, completely quiet. There was no TV on, no background noise, nothing to distract me, just the faint hum of the building and the sound of my own movements as I worked. Then, out of nowhere, I felt it. That unmistakable feeling that someone is watching you. It wasn't subtle. It didn't creep in slowly. It hit all at once like a switch had been flipped. 1 second, I was focused on my work, and the next, I was completely aware of something else in the room. I froze for a moment, then slowly looked up. And that's when I saw her. She was peering around the edge of the wall, just enough that I could see her face. Her hair was long and white, hanging loosely around her shoulders. Her skin was pale, almost unnaturally so, and her eyes were wide open, fixed directly on me. There was something wrong about the way she was looking at me. It wasn't just attention. It felt intense, almost unhinged. But what stood out the most was her mouth. It was stretched back into this strange, rigid expression. Not quite a smile, but close enough that it felt like one. It was pulled tight, exposing her teeth in a way that didn't look natural, like her face had been locked into that position. I stared at her, and she stared back. The strangest part of it all was the way I was seeing her. Even now, it's hard to explain. It didn't feel like I was seeing her in the normal sense, like light hitting my eyes and forming an image. It felt like she was there, but also not. Like the image of her was somehow being placed directly into my mind. I know how that sounds, and I've thought about it a lot over the years, trying to find a better way to describe it. But that's the closest I can get. It didn't feel like a normal visual experience. It felt like something deeper, something I couldn't fully understand. We stayed like that for what felt like a long time, but was probably around 10 seconds. Neither of us moved. Then, for reasons I still can't fully explain, I turned back to my computer and went back to work. Outwardly, I stayed calm. I didn't react, didn't jump, didn't run, but inside my thoughts were racing. Every instinct I had was telling me that something was very wrong, but I forced myself to stay still, to act like nothing had happened. Part of me was convinced that I had imagined it, that it was just my mind playing tricks on me after spending too many late nights alone in that place. After a minute or so, I looked back toward the wall. She was gone. Just like that. The space was empty again, exactly as it should have been. No sign that anything had been there at all. That was enough for me. I shut everything down as quickly as I could without completely panicking. I gathered my things, turned off the lights, and left. I didn't run, but I moved fast. Faster than I ever had leaving that place before. For the next week, I tried not to think about it. I told myself it was stress, or fatigue, or just one of those things that happens when you're alone too much. I had no proof that what I saw was real, and I didn't want to start convincing myself of something I couldn't explain. Then, about a week later, I was up at the owner's main house, helping set up for some kind of event. They often hosted gatherings, and sometimes employees would help out with preparation. There was a family from South America that worked for them. The parents were employed by the household, and the owners were helping their kids get through school. Over time, I had gotten to know them a little, and we were on friendly terms. While I was in the dining room, I ended up talking with the husband. It was casual at first, just normal conversation. But then, almost without thinking, I asked him something. I asked if anything strange had ever happened down at the office. The moment the question left my mouth, I realized how odd it sounded. But it was too late to take it back. He looked at me for a second. Then he said something that made my stomach drop. He asked me if I had seen her, too. There was no hesitation in his voice, no confusion about what I meant. It was like he already knew exactly what I was talking about. I didn't even know what to say at first. I just nodded slightly, waiting for him to explain. He told me that I wasn't the only one. There were women who worked at the house who refused to go anywhere near the office. They wouldn't step foot in that building, no matter what. They didn't explain it in detail, but it was clear that they had experienced something that made them draw a hard line. Something had happened there. I tried to find out more after that. I looked into the history of the place, tried to figure out what the house had been before it was converted into an office, or who had lived there before the current owners. But I never found anything solid. No clear answers, no obvious explanation. Whatever it was, it didn't leave a paper trail. After that, I stopped staying late. The idea of sitting alone in that house at night, knowing what I had seen and knowing that others had experienced something similar, wasn't something I could ignore anymore. The comfort I had once felt there was gone, replaced by a constant sense of unease. Not long after that, I left the company. It wasn't entirely because of what happened. There were other reasons, normal reasons that come with changing jobs, but I won't lie and say it didn't play a part. Because once you experience something like that, once you see something you can't explain and then find out you weren't the only one, it changes the way you look at a place. Even now, years later, I still think about that night, about the way she looked at me, and about the fact that I wasn't supposed to be the first person to see her. When I was a kid, I grew up in South Florida, in one of those neighborhoods where everything felt close together but still somehow quiet at certain times of the day. It was the kind of place where kids spent hours outside, riding bikes, fishing in nearby canals, and wandering around without much worry. Back then, life felt simple. The days were long, the air was warm, and even the sudden storms that rolled in felt like just another part of normal life. On this particular day, I was out with my two cousins, who were twin sisters. They were both about 10 at the time, and I was 8. We had spent the afternoon fishing, just messing around like kids do, not really caring whether we caught anything or not. It was more about being outside together than anything else. In South Florida, the weather has a way of changing without much warning. One moment the sky is clear, and the next it's like someone flipped a switch. And that's exactly what happened that day. Out of nowhere, the sky darkened, and within minutes it started pouring rain. Not a light drizzle, but one of those heavy, soaking rains that hits hard and fast. We didn't waste any time. The moment it started coming down, we grabbed our stuff and started running toward my house. The rain soaked through our clothes almost instantly, and the ground became slick under our feet. But we didn't slow down. We were laughing at first, the way kids do when something unexpected happens. but all we wanted was to get inside and dry off. When we finally reached my house, we ran up to the front door, expecting it to be open, or at least quickly answered. My parents were hosting a party that day, so there were plenty of people inside. Music, voices, laughter. It should have been obvious that someone would hear us. But when I tried the door, it was locked. That alone wasn't too strange. Sometimes the door would be locked, even if people were home. So I knocked. No answer. I knocked again, louder this time. Still nothing. That's when things started to feel off. At first, it was just a small feeling, something in the back of my mind that I couldn't quite explain. But within seconds, it grew stronger. It wasn't just me, either. I could tell my cousins felt it too. The mood shifted completely, like the air around us had changed. We all became scared. Not the kind of fear that comes from seeing something or hearing something obvious. It was deeper than that. It felt instinctive, like our bodies were reacting to something we couldn't see or understand. The twins started to panic, their voices shaking as they called out. And before long, they were crying. I remember feeling it just as strongly. My heart was racing, and I couldn't figure out why. There was no clear reason for it. We were standing at my own front door in broad daylight, with a house full of people just on the other side. And yet, it felt wrong. The rain kept pouring down, soaking us completely, and I banged on the door again, harder this time. I shouted for my parents, calling out as loudly as I could, expecting someone, anyone, to respond. That's when we heard it. A voice. It was a child's voice, small and clear. "You can come over here." The three of us froze. For a moment, none of us moved. We all looked at each other, trying to confirm that we had actually heard it. Then we started looking around, scanning the yard, the street, anywhere the sound could have come from. There was no one there. No kids, no neighbors, no one hiding or standing nearby. Just the rain and the empty space around us. The fear got worse. We started pounding on the door again, more urgently now. Our movements frantic. The twins were crying harder, and I could feel panic building in my chest. Then the voice came again. "Come over here." It sounded the same as before, close, but not close enough to pinpoint. It didn't echo or fade the way a normal voice would in the rain. It just existed, like it was right there with us. We looked around again, more desperately this time, but still saw nothing. At that point, we lost it completely. All three of us started crying, overwhelmed by a fear that didn't make sense, but felt completely real. It was like something was wrong with the situation in a way we couldn't explain, and our bodies were reacting to it whether we understood it or not. Then, for the third time, the voice spoke. "Don't be scared." That was it for me. I couldn't stand there any longer. Something inside me snapped, and I knew I had to get away from the front door. Without thinking, I turned and ran along the side of the house. The fence there wasn't too high, and I had climbed it before, but never in a rush like that. My hand slipped a little from the rain, but I managed to pull myself up and over. I dropped down into the backyard, my heart pounding as I looked around. And everything was normal, completely normal. The entire back patio was full of people. My parents, their friends, everyone was gathered there, talking, laughing, enjoying the party. There was music playing, drinks on the tables, the usual kind of scene you'd expect. It was like stepping into a different world. Just seconds before, I'd been standing in the front yard, soaked in rain, terrified for reasons I couldn't explain. And now I was surrounded by familiar faces, noise and warmth. My dad noticed me immediately. He walked over quickly, concern on his face, asking what was wrong. I must have looked like I'd seen something terrible, because I couldn't even form a proper sentence. I tried to explain, but the words didn't come out right. All I could say was that something was wrong, that we were scared, that there was a voice. He didn't fully understand, but he followed me anyway. Together, we went through the house toward the front door. When we opened it, my cousins were still there, standing in the rain crying. They ran inside the moment the door opened, still shaken, still trying to process what had just happened. The strange thing is, We never really explained it properly to anyone else there. Maybe it was because we didn't have the words, or maybe it was because it sounded too strange to say out loud. Over time, it became one of those things that just sat in the back of our minds. Years passed. We grew up, moved on with our lives, and that day became just another memory from childhood. But it never fully went away. It stayed with us, not as something we talked about often, but as something we all remembered clearly. Recently, we brought it up again. We were older now, in our mid-20s, sitting together, having a few drinks, and talking about old memories. Somehow, the story came up again. At first, it was casual, almost like we were testing each other to see if we all remembered it the same way. But as we talked, it became clear that we did. Every detail matched. The rain, the locked door, the fear that came out of nowhere, and most of all, the voice. We all remembered it the same way. Even now, we can't explain it. There's no clear answer, no logical explanation that fits everything we experienced. It wasn't just one of us imagining things. All three of us heard it, felt it, reacted to it in the same way. And even after all these years, it still stands out as one of the scariest moments of our lives. Not because we saw something, but because we didn't. A few years ago, I decided to go for a long walk alone through the woods in England. It was one of those rare, perfect days where everything feels calm and clear. The sky was bright, the sunlight filtered softly through the trees, and the air had that fresh, clean feeling you only really notice when you're far away from cities and noise. It felt like the kind of day where nothing could go wrong. I didn't have a strict plan. I just wanted to walk, explore, and enjoy being outside. The woods stretched on for miles, and I let myself wander without worrying too much about direction. At the time, it felt freeing. I followed paths when I saw them, stepped off them when something interesting caught my eye, and kept moving forward without thinking about how I'd get back. After a couple of hours, though, I realized I was a bit more lost than I had intended to be. It wasn't panic-inducing at first. I still had a general sense of where I was. I could hear faint traffic somewhere in the distance, which meant there was a road nearby. That was enough to keep me calm. As long as I kept moving in roughly the right direction, I figured I would eventually find my way out. The woods themselves were beautiful. Everything around me looked like something out of a painting. At one point, I came across a small stream running gently through the trees. Beside it stood an old watermill, weathered and worn, clearly unused for a long time. It looked like something from another era, quiet and still, blending into the landscape as if it had always been there. I paused there for a while, just taking it in. The sound of the water, the way the light hit the moss-covered wood, the complete absence of people. It all felt peaceful, almost unreal in how perfect it seemed. I kept walking. Not long after, I reached the clearing where the trees opened up enough for sunlight to pour in. In the middle of that clearing sat an old Massey Ferguson tractor. It was rusted and abandoned, clearly not used in years. The paint had faded, and parts of it looked like they were slowly being reclaimed by the environment. The sunlight filtered through the leaves above, casting shifting patterns of light and shadow across it. It should have felt eerie, but it didn't. At that point, everything still felt strangely charming, like I was stumbling across pieces of history hidden in the woods. Further along, I came across something else. It looked like an old trailer, the kind you might see in a small trailer park. But this one was in terrible condition. It had been there so long that it had started to collapse in on itself. The structure had bent and broken, sagging off the brick supports that once held it up. Around it were scattered pieces of rusting farm equipment, half buried in the ground or overtaken by weeds. That was the first moment things started to feel slightly off. Not dangerous, just different. The kind of place that made you pause for a second before continuing, even if you couldn't explain why. Still, I kept going, Eventually, I reached a barbed wire fence that cut straight across my path. It stretched out in both directions, blocking the way I had been heading. On the other side, I could see more open land, and I knew that beyond that, there was likely a road. Turning back would have meant retracing my steps for quite a distance, and I didn't want to do that. So instead, I decided to follow the fence, hoping to find a way through. As I walked along it, I started noticing signs. They weren't official or professionally made. They were handwritten, attached to the fence in uneven ways. The words were simple but clear. Keep out. No entry. Some had additional warnings, written in a rushed, almost desperate way. The more I saw, the more uneasy I felt. It wasn't just the message of the signs. It was the way they looked. They didn't feel like standard warnings. They felt personal, like someone had gone out of their way to make sure people stayed away. I hesitated, but I kept moving. Eventually, I found a spot where the fence dipped slightly. There was a badger hole underneath it, just large enough for me to squeeze through if I tried. I stood there for a moment, looking at it, weighing my options. On one hand, the signs were clear. On the other, I could still hear the road in the distance. I convinced myself it would be fine. I wasn't planning to stay, just to pass through and get back to a place I recognized. So I got down and crawled through. On the other side, the ground opened up into what looked like farmland. There was a track leading away from an old barn, and I figured that if I followed it, it would eventually take me to the road. As I approached the barn from behind, I noticed movement inside. There were 2 horses. They were tied up, standing in the dim interior, and something about them immediately felt wrong. They looked thin, unhealthy, their bodies not quite right. Even from a distance, I could tell they weren't being properly cared for. There was also a smell. It wasn't overpowering at first, but it was there, carried faintly on the air. Something sour, something that didn't belong in a place that should have been open and fresh. At that point, I became very aware of the fact that I wasn't supposed to be there. I was trespassing. The signs had made that clear. The last thing I wanted was to run into whoever owned the land, especially given the condition of the place. My mind immediately went to the worst-case scenario. Someone angry, someone armed, someone who wouldn't take kindly to a stranger wandering around. So I moved quietly. I kept my distance from the barn, trying not to disturb the horses, and focused on reaching the track beyond it. As I walked, I paid more attention to my surroundings, glancing back toward the trees, listening for any sound that might suggest someone else was nearby. The ground beneath my feet started to feel uneven. At first, it was subtle. Small bumps, slight dips, nothing too unusual for a rural area. But as I continued, it became more noticeable. The surface wasn't just uneven, it felt unstable, like I was stepping on things that shifted under my weight. Then I stepped down and something cracked. It was a sharp, dry sound, completely out of place. I stopped and looked down. At first, I didn't understand what I was seeing. It looked like a curved shape, pale against the darker ground. For a second, my brain tried to make it into something normal, something harmless. Then it clicked. It was a rib cage. A pig's rib cage. The bones were exposed, picked clean in places, with bits of decayed material still clinging to them. The shape was unmistakable. I stepped back immediately, a wave of disgust hitting me, and then something else cracked under my foot. Another one. That's when I really looked around, and what I saw made my stomach drop. I wasn't just standing near 1 or 2 carcasses. I was standing in the middle of dozens. They were everywhere, spread across the ground like a grim carpet, in different stages of decay. Some were nothing but skeletons, bleached and broken. Others were partially decomposed, their forms still recognizable. Some looked more recent, their bodies swollen, dark, and still contained within black bags that had been torn or left open. It went on farther than I could take in at a glance. The smell suddenly made sense. It hit me all at once. Stronger now that I knew what I was surrounded by. Thick, heavy, and impossible to ignore. I didn't think anymore. Every bit of caution I had been holding onto disappeared. I didn't care about being quiet, didn't care about being seen. All I wanted was to get out of there. I moved as fast as I could, stepping carefully at first, then not caring where my feet landed as long as I was moving away. I climbed over the uneven ground, pushing past the edge of that horrible area and onto the track. Once I was clear, I ran. I followed the track until I reached a gate, a simple 5-bar gate that marked the edge of the property. I didn't stop to think. I grabbed onto it, pulled myself up, and jumped over without slowing down. On the other side, I kept moving until I felt like I had put enough distance between myself and that place. Only then did I slow down. The walk home felt different. Everything that had seemed beautiful earlier now felt slightly off. The woods, the quiet, the isolation. It all carried a different weight after what I had seen. Later, I learned that the area had been affected by the foot and mouth outbreak. It was a serious issue at the time, and farms had been forced to cull entire herds to prevent the disease from spreading. My best guess is that the farmer had pigs that became infected and didn't want to report it. Maybe they were afraid of losing everything. Maybe they thought they could handle it themselves. So instead, they let them die and left them there. I never went back to that part of the woods again. Some places look peaceful from the outside, until you get too close. When I was a kid, I used to spend a lot of time in the car while my parents ran errands. It was just one of those normal things back then. You'd get dropped into the back seat with a book or a toy, told to wait for a few minutes, and that was it. No phones, no distractions, just you and your thoughts, while the world moved quietly outside the windows. On that particular day, I was sitting alone in the back seat of our station wagon in a parking lot. I don't remember exactly where we were, but I remember the feeling of it clearly. It wasn't crowded or busy, just a typical open lot with a few cars scattered around. My parents had stepped away for a bit, probably to run into a store nearby, and I had been told to stay in the car. I didn't mind at first. I was used to it. I was just sitting there staring out the window. I'd maybe lost in my own thoughts when it happened. A loud bang hit the glass beside me. It came out of nowhere. The sound was sharp and sudden, so loud that it made me jump in my seat. My heart immediately started racing, and for a split second, I didn't even know what I was looking at. Then I saw him. There was a man standing right outside the car, close enough that his face was only inches from the window. I hadn't seen him approach. One moment I was alone, and the next, he was just there. He gestured for me to open the door. At that age, I was going through a phase where I questioned everything. I didn't just do what people told me without asking why. It was probably annoying for the adults around me, but in that moment, it ended up being the one thing that worked in my favor. Instead of reacting the way he expected, I looked at him and asked why. He didn't hesitate. He told me that my grandmother was very sick and that he had been sent to take me to the hospital. The way he said it was calm, almost practiced, like it was something he had already thought through. But even as a kid, something about it didn't sit right with me. My mind started racing. Both of my grandmothers lived about an hour away. If something serious had happened, there was no way someone would just show up like this without calling first. And even if they had called, it wouldn't be some random person coming to pick me up from a parking lot. Another thought hit me just as quickly. How did he even know where I was? We weren't at home. We weren't somewhere predictable. We were in a random parking lot, about 15 minutes away from where we lived. There was no reason for anyone to come looking for me there. None of it made sense. Something inside me shifted from confusion to alertness. I didn't fully understand what was happening, but I knew enough to know that I shouldn't open that door. Without saying anything else, I reached up and locked it. I remember noticing in that exact moment that the door had been unlocked the entire time. That realization sent a chill through me. The man tried the handle almost immediately. He pulled on it, expecting it to open, but it didn't. There was a brief pause, like he hadn't expected resistance. Then he moved slightly, trying again, testing it more firmly this time. My heart was pounding harder now. I leaned forward quickly, reaching into the front seat to lock the driver's door. And then I reached across as far as I could to lock the passenger door as well. My movements were rushed, clumsy, but focused. I didn't want to leave anything open, any chance for him to get in. Outside, he started moving around the car. I could see him through the windows as he went from one door to another, checking each one, pulling on the handles, trying to find a way inside. The sound of the handles rattling echoed in the quiet space around me, each attempt sending another wave of fear through my chest. I felt completely exposed. Sitting there in the back seat, surrounded by glass, with someone on the outside trying to get in, I felt like I had nowhere to go. There was no way out for me, no place to hide. It was like being trapped in a fishbowl while something circled around you, looking for a way in. I didn't scream. I didn't move. I just sat there, watching him, trying to stay as still as possible while my mind raced through every possible outcome. He kept checking the doors for a few moments longer, moving from one side of the car to the other, testing each handle like he hoped one of them would give. But they didn't. Eventually, something in his behavior changed. I don't remember exactly what it was. Maybe it was the realization that I wasn't going to open the door. Maybe it was the risk of someone else noticing what he was doing. Whatever it was, he stopped. He looked at me one more time. Then he walked away. Just like that. No explanation, no apology, nothing. He simply turned and left, disappearing into the parking lot as quietly as he had appeared. I sat there for a long time after that, still frozen in place, trying to process what had just happened. My heart was still racing and my hands felt shaky, but I didn't move. I didn't unlock the doors, I didn't relax, I just waited. When my parents finally came back to the car, I remember feeling this overwhelming sense of relief. The moment they opened the door, the tension that had been building inside me started to break. I told them what had happened, or at least I tried to. It came out in pieces at first, the details scattered and jumbled, but eventually they understood. Looking back on it now, it's clear how serious that situation was. At the time, I didn't fully grasp it. I just knew that something felt wrong, and I reacted the only way I knew how. I questioned him. I didn't trust what he said. And when things didn't add up, I acted. I locked the doors. It's strange to think about how something so small, something as simple as refusing to cooperate, could make such a big difference. At that age, being difficult was just part of who I was. I didn't realize that it could actually protect me. But in that moment, it did. If I had been more trusting, more willing to listen without questioning, things might have turned out very differently. Instead, I stayed in the car, and the doors stayed locked. Sometimes, what feels like a flaw ends up being the thing that keeps you safe. Back when my wife and I were still in college, long before we got married, we used to do things that felt harmless at the time, but probably weren't the smartest decisions. We were undergrads in Montana, living on a tight budget like most students, always looking for small ways to make life a little more enjoyable without spending money we didn't have. One of the things we started doing was sneaking into a local Best Western hotel to use their pool and hot tub. It wasn't something we overthought. The hotel wasn't strict about checking guests, and most of the time, the pool area was empty anyway. It felt like a quiet little escape from everything. Classes, assignments, and the constant stress that came with being students. Usually it was just the two of us. We'd slip in, keep to ourselves, and relax in the hot tub or swim for a while. And it became a routine of sorts. Something we looked forward to after long days. The atmosphere was always calm, almost too calm, with that familiar echo of water and the faint hum of the building around us. For a long time, nothing unusual ever happened. Until one night. That evening started just like any other. We made our way into the hotel, walked casually past the front desk, and headed toward the pool area. When we got there, though, it wasn't empty like usual. There was a family already there. It looked like a typical setup. Parents with 3 kids, along with what seemed to be a family friend. The kids were playing in the pool, splashing around and laughing, while the adults kept an eye on them. It wasn't ideal, since we preferred having the place to ourselves, but it wasn't a big deal either. Well, we weren't doing anything we shouldn't have been, just sitting in the hot tub and relaxing. So we stayed. We got into the jacuzzi and tried to ignore the noise from the pool, settling into our usual quiet conversation. For a while, everything felt normal. The kids played, the adults chatted, and we stayed in our corner of the hot tub, minding our own business. Then, after some time, another person showed up. He came in alone. At first, nothing about him seemed too out of place. He walked into the pool area, looked around briefly, and then approached the hot tub where we were sitting. He asked if we minded if he joined us. Now, given the situation, we weren't exactly in a position to say no. We weren't even supposed to be there in the first place, so we just shrugged it off and said it was fine. What happened next was strange. Before he got into the hot tub, before he even took off his outer layer of clothing, he walked right up to the edge of it and knelt down. Without saying anything, he leaned forward and dunked his head straight into the water. Not quickly, not casually. He kept it there for a long time. It was long enough that both of us noticed and exchanged a glance. It felt excessive, uncomfortable even. Then he pulled his head back out, water dripping everywhere, and shook it hard, sending droplets splashing onto us. We didn't say anything, just sat there, unsure of what to make of it. Then he did it again. He dunked his head back into the water, holding it there for another long stretch. When he came up, he repeated the same motion, shaking his head, spraying water around. He did this several times. What made it even more uncomfortable was how close he was to us. The hot tub wasn't huge, but it wasn't tiny either. There was space for him to do whatever he was doing at the other end, away from us. But instead, he chose to do it right next to where we were sitting. It felt deliberate. After repeating this odd routine a few times, he finally got into the hot tub. But even then, the behavior didn't stop. He lowered himself into the water and then stretched out his body horizontally, submerging himself almost completely. He stayed under like that for what felt like an unusually long time, holding his breath without moving much at all. While he was doing this, his legs were extended toward us. At first, we tried to ignore it, but then his feet started brushing against us, not aggressively, not in a way that was clearly intentional, but enough to make it uncomfortable. It crossed that invisible line where you go from tolerating someone's presence to feeling like you need to leave. We didn't say anything. We just got out. Without making a scene, we stepped out of the hot tub and moved over to the pool where the kids were playing. It felt safer to be around other people, even if it was noisier. The shift in atmosphere helped a little, but we were both aware of what had just happened. He stayed in the hot tub. For about 10 more minutes, he just sat there, like nothing had happened. Eventually, he got out, wrapped himself in a towel, and moved toward the pool area. That's when things got even more unsettling. He didn't get into the pool. Instead, he crouched down near the steps at the shallow end, close to where the kids were playing. His posture was strange. He pulled himself into a tight, almost curled position, with his arms wrapped around his legs. And then he just stayed there, watching. He stared at the kids as they played, not interacting, not speaking, just watching. Slowly, he started rocking back and forth, still in that curled position. The expression on his face was intense, focused in a way that didn't feel normal or appropriate. The longer it went on, the more noticeable it became. The parents noticed. We noticed. Even the kids seemed to sense that something wasn't right. For several minutes, he just stayed there, rocking slightly, staring with that same fixed expression. The whole room felt tense, like everyone was silently trying to figure out what to do without escalating the situation. Eventually, he seemed to realize that people were watching him, that he had become the center of attention. Without saying anything, he stood up, turned, and left the pool area. Almost at the same time, one of the parents moved quickly toward the entrance, clearly intending to call hotel security. That was enough for us. We decided to leave as well. We didn't want to be there anymore. The entire mood had shifted from relaxed to uncomfortable, and neither of us felt like sticking around to see what happened next. As we were getting ready to leave, my wife went into the women's restroom to change. I stayed outside near the exit, waiting for her. The pool area was quieter now, but I still felt uneasy, like something wasn't fully resolved. That's when I looked out the window toward the parking lot and saw him. He was sitting in his car, parked in a spot where he had a clear view of the building, and he was staring directly at me. It wasn't a casual glance. It wasn't someone just looking around. It was direct, focused, intentional, like he had been waiting there, watching. A cold feeling settled in my chest. I didn't take my eyes off him. He didn't look away. We just stared at each other through the glass, separated by distance but still very aware of each other's presence. The longer it went on, the more uncomfortable it became. As soon as my wife came back out, I told her what I had seen. We didn't waste any time after that. I called the police and explained the situation as clearly as I could, leaving out the part about us not being guests at the hotel. We stayed inside near the entrance, keeping an eye on the parking lot. After a while, he finally drove off. Only then did the tension ease. We left shortly after that, both of us quiet on the way home, replaying everything that had happened. It was one of those experiences that sticks with you, not because anything actually happened, but because it felt like something could have. After that night, we never went back to that hotel pool again. Some things just aren't worth the risk.